Hi everyone and welcome to today's Orchestrator Weekly with two presentations. And I would say let's dive into the first presentation. Aaron, do you want to give us an update about your CSOC project?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. And thank you for joining. And on my presentation is on my project I've been working for past months. It's on implementing a new integration testing framework using Jacqueline language for Ceph orchestrating operations. And as a quick recap, what is Jacqueline language and KCLI? And Jacqueline language is a common natural language which uses common keywords like given and then to define a step to execute to create test scenarios. And I have provided a sample steps we have implemented in the project. And you can see, as you can see, we can execute few commands on host and 2 steps to validate whether we have a specific keyword from to validate whether there are specific keywords that contain from output, which I'll be talking in later slides as well. And KCLI tool. KCLI tool is used to create the environment to run specific different kinds of tests in labs to run different test scenarios. And aim of this project is to create test scenarios that are similar to executing commands and also validating the command that to specify specific keywords so that we can validate the output of a executed command, and also creating a test scenario that doesn't require any programming language other than that if we are required to implement a completely new state. And the test scenarios can be implemented other than the programmers as well. And these test cases computers and integrated to CI. And it's based on behavior-based development. And speaking on the current state of this project, I have implemented functionality so that user can define different test labs configurations and to execute a specific set of test scenarios, which will be created using the KCLI. And user will be able to define certain commands that should be executed in the virtual machine and which should be executed on Ceph ADM server. And the user will be able to use the step specific as the current stage of this project. I have implemented steps where the user will be able to create different test lab configurations to execute specific set of test scenarios, and also user will be able to define commands on cost and also in Ceph ADM cells and specify which commands should be executed in which cell. And user will be able to specify the keywords that are expected to be in a specific output or output of a executed command. And currently I'm also working on defining more test scenarios and implementing steps to execute a specific command and store the output of the command in a specific variable, which can be later accessed to execute some other commands like accessing the path from a specific output, and also accessing the configuration of KCLI or the virtual machines. For example, to access the IP address of a virtual machine created to execute specific commands. And looking into the implementation structure, I have implemented this feature under behavior test under test directory. Under the behavior test, we have 2 directories. One contains the feature and the Python 'Python' 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 ' behave tests, which is bootstrap script template, and the KCL plan script template, which will be modified according to the user given configurations. And the tests will be defined under .feature files used in the Jacqueline language, and the steps, the Python implementation of the steps will be defined under the Ceph steps, or we can define any additional steps under the step directory. And we have the environment KCLI handler and validation util scripts to handle other functions to execute this, runs all the test scenarios. And looking into defining the environment config, user will define the configuration on which the environment configuration where the test scenarios should be executed. And as an example, here in this example, we have 3 nodes with 4 gigs of RAMs and 4 CPUs, and it uses a Fedora 32 image to create an environment to run specific tests. And these tests will be created under the test in KCLI plan will be created under behave test plan, and also uses "b" KCLI container to execute any KCLI commands. And here's a basic structure of defining a test scenario. After defining the feature, we are required to define the test scenarios. As you can see, it is simple language where, given that I log as a root user into the Ceph node 00, and I can use the step I execute in a host and provide the commands that should be executed. And again, I execute Ceph ADM version, and then I use the then step that I get results which contains and provide the keywords that should be in the output of Ceph ADM version. And this validates whether the keywords contained in the output. And here's a test scenario used to create the OSDs. And as you can see, this contains different steps where I execute in Ceph ADM cell. So these commands will be executed in Ceph ADM cell. And also a step where it waits for a certain period of time so that it gets the output. It waits for a certain period of time to validate the outputs. And running this test, we can run all these tests together, or we can use the behave tags to specify which scenarios should be executed. As you can see, I have used the @OSD tag to specify this feature is related to OSDs, and when executed with the tag flag using the behave command, it will be executing only the OSD scenarios. As a current issue which we encountered during the implementation, that we cannot run the behave tests using the tox command or on this implementation of behave using the tox command, because it requires the environment variables to execute the KCLI command, which requires sudo privileges. And we are looking into mitigate this workaround on this issue as well. Let me share my screen on example of how the output of executing these commands, these test scenarios. Here's output of previously I executed all test cases where which has run previously. Yeah, you would specify to run only test scenarios with the tag of Ceph cell, which contains the test scenarios to run the test scenarios of validating the Ceph cell command. So initially it creates the KCLI plan with the defined configurations. It requires a few minutes to create the virtual machines and run the bootstrap script as well. Because it's taking time, I can show you previously executed output of this command. And the feature with the Ceph cell, and I have of the Ceph commands here and validated the output, what is required, and
Well, maybe I don't know if somebody wants to ask something about the framework, the implementation of the possibilities. Maybe it's the time while the script is being executed.
I have a question. So you're pasting the output of the commands verbatim in the .feature files, right? Is there a way to just mark to just shortcut things and I don't know, maybe an ellipsis or create wildcards such that specific details are not important, like for example, if here there is an exception and you want to verify the exception, then you probably do not want to have the line numbers matching the output. So typically you would have some kind of a way to say, yeah, I don't want this part of the output to be relevant for me. Is that possible?
Sorry, I couldn't. I didn't get the complete question properly.
Okay, so imagine you have for example, you have three hosts in your cluster, and the IP addresses are dynamically generated.
Yeah.
And is it possible to just wildcard those IP addresses instead of pasting them verbatim into the test cases?
Yeah. Currently, we the dynamically the keywords are specified which are not dynamically defined. For example, to test the hosts, define the hosts in the cluster, like we specify these hosts should be defined, and we specify the name of the host, but not the IP addresses. Currently, there is no implementation to like neglect a specific section of the output. Or
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Just a curiosity. I have a curiosity question. Where else is Gherkin used? I sort of like it. It's very simple. I mean, where is this unique to this environment, or are there other places that use this for testing purposes?
Yeah, it's based on behavior-based development. So it is used on PyTest, behave PyTest. Other places where behavioral development is used. I'm currently not aware of any projects currently it is being used, but there are frameworks used to test behavioral testings like Behave.
Thanks.
Yeah, and finally, I would like that's how on my implementation I have been working, and I would like to thank my mentor and the Ceph community for giving this opportunity to work on a completely new feature. And thank you. Looking forward to contributing on other issues and working on this project as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. I have another question. So, did you manage to have a Jenkins integration already, or is it still not yet completely done?
No, it's not integrated because currently we use only the behave test command to execute the test cases. Using the talks, it doesn't. It requires the pseudo privileges.
Which means those tests are probably going to get to break very soon, right after the pull request is merged. Rumega, do you plan to add some kind of a Jenkins integration?
Yeah, well, there is a pull request that Alfonso implemented about well, to test dashboard using a Jenkins job, okay, and basically it's very similar, okay, but the test is not implemented using Behave. Okay, so I think that it would be easy to integrate this kind of test with the Jenkins, the Jenkins system, and I think that it's not very difficult, okay. And what we have in this moment is is just a proof of concept, okay, that could be expanded and improved in several ways, okay. And what I think that is going to happen is that the tests are there, and I think that what could be broken maybe is functionality, okay, but the test is just executing Ceph commands, okay, and Ceph commands, so it's very difficult to break or to do something in the code that is going to break or to cause problems in the test. What is going to happen is that the test probably is not going to pass, but the test is just executing commands. Okay, so I think that it could be it could have the functionality available forever. Okay, unless you change the commands that we are using in Ceph to do things.
Nevertheless, it would be great to have some kind of an automation for it that's in Jenkins.
Yes,
also.
completely agree.
Yeah, awesome project.
The dependencies are the same as the FADM dashboard Jenkins job you have to have, so it should be quite easy to create a parallel Jenkins job.
Okay. Any other questions for Arun for the project? Okay.
Did complete the suite?
If you're asking about the complete test case execution.
No, yes, out of curiosity, if it completed in your local.
Yeah. Yes, it has completed. Guys, share the screen.
Well, you want to show the result, okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have only specified to run only the Ceph. I think, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so I only specified to run only the tags, the test scenarios associated with Ceph cell. So it has all the test scenarios has been tested and executed, and just two others have skipped and it has passed, and it also has deleted the environment created for testing this test scenarios.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Then thank you, Arun, for your presentation.
Yeah.
And then we have another presentation. Melissa, do you want to take the stage?
Yep. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Melissa, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I've been doing these past few months at my outreachy internship with Ceph. So essentially, my project was to replace Azeknet and Remoto in Ceph ADM with the Python SSH library, which we decided to be Async SSH. And on GitHub, I'm Melissa Quinley, IRC Melissa Lee. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about the rationale of why the replacement is necessary. So Azeknet is a Python library that it opens gateways and channels and allows you to execute commands remotely. And Remoto is kind of like a wrapper around Azeknet. And one reason why Azeknet should be replaced is that it's currently in maintenance mode, so it's no longer being actively developed. Another very significant reason is that Azeknet has poor error reporting since it's not a dedicated SSH library. So if users encounter an SSH connection issue in Ceph ADM, it'd be difficult to see what exactly was failing. But in contrast to this, Async SSH, since it is a dedicated SSH Python library, it does handle a lot of the errors within the library, and it has debug logs which are quite informative that we can show users if there is an error, so then overall it can improve user experience. So I want to briefly talk about some of the challenges I faced during this project. And I can boil it down to three main categories. The first one is evaluating simply which Python SSH library to replace Azeknet and Remoto with. So initially we were deciding, we thought we were going to go with Paramiko. It is a very popular Python SSH library. It's very well known. But we were running into limitations with Paramiko that you might expect Python SSH libraries to have capabilities that Paramiko it's so low level that it didn't implement it itself. So an example of that is Paramiko didn't natively support OpenSSH config. And within Ceph-ADM, users can pass in their SSH config. So this didn't align with what Ceph-ADM needed. So we decided to switch over to another library, Async SSH, which is an asynchronous implementation of the SSH v2 protocol. And Async SSH does support some of the open SSH config. And overall, it's just easier to use because a lot of the features that you would expect an SSH library to have are like abstracted. So the second main challenge I faced during this project was figuring out how to integrate that asynchronous, those async functions and coroutine, that code needed for the library into the pre-existing code in Ceph-ADM that is synchronous. And that can also be broken down into like the event loop, which you need for async, like where do we put it, how do we run it, and then being able to balance multiple threads. And the overall solution to that was to create a thread just for SSH and to run the event loop on that thread, and then to submit the async functions onto the event loop from other threads. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the third challenge was figuring out how to debug, because I had to learn about containers, POM and Docker. Also had to learn a lot about tautology and debugging in tautology, and also, of course, learning a lot about Ceph and Ceph-ADM. So in terms of the architecture, I thought it would be helpful to show some of the code. So I feel like it explains also a lot about what's happening. But basically, there's this module that I created, sh.py in PyBind Manager Ceph-ADM. And what we're doing here is we're creating a thread just for SSH and Ceph-ADM. And we're creating our event loop and starting it in that thread. And then we have a method getResult, which basically gets the result of the async coroutines. And with run coroutine thread safe, it submits the coroutines onto the event loop in that thread. And .result will basically block until the result is obtained. So that essentially maintains the synchronous order that we need in Ceph-ADM, despite using an asynchronous library. And in terms of a developer standpoint, or how to use the code, so this is an example. It's from run Ceph-ADM in serve.py. So checking which Python 3 version. So we have a synchronous function check execute command, which is in the ssh.py module, and we're basically just calling that. And then inside sh.py, our synchronous function is basically a wrapper around the asynchronous coroutines. And those asynchronous coroutines are submitted to run on the event loop, and we're waiting for the result, which will then be returned. So this is an example of what an asynchronous coroutine would look like. It just has the syntax of the async functions. So we can await upon other coroutines, and then also handle errors and return any outputs. And essentially, beyond the syntax of the async syntax, it would be somewhat comparable to programming with a regular synchronous programming. You just have to have a synchronous wrapper function around your coroutine. And to show a little bit about what Async SSH is doing in the background, after I bootstrap, I'm showing these manager logs. And typically a user wouldn't see all of this because it's really verbose, so I disabled that in my PR. But basically, I just enabled it for the purpose of this presentation, just to show what Ceph-ADM, or what Async SSH in Ceph-ADM is doing. So it's opening a connection to the host, and then we're caching that connection object per host, and then we're running our commands which Python 3 through check execute command or execute command of the other functions in Ceph-ADM. And then we get some result from the remote host, and whether it's a success or failure, the channel is closed. And then subsequent commands will open further channels and close those channels. And then in the application, we can just handle if there's any failures or what to do next. So that's essentially just a basic overview of the implementation and architecture of the Async SSH in Ceph-ADM. And in terms of like the future of this and how to like kind of maintain it or like how to manage it, because I know that there's like with the agent and with maybe like future changes to CephADM's SSH architecture, there's like how do we like integrate this within that? I think what's really important is making sure you have that dedicated SSH thread and that you're running the coroutines using that thread safe async function. That's really important. And then from a developer standpoint, you wouldn't necessarily need to care a lot about the event loop because it is you do have that synchronous wrapper function, so you can just use that normally. And yeah, so that's basically just wraps up my presentation. And thank you for listening, and thanks to Sebastian for mentoring me through the project and the rest of the Orchestrator team and everyone here. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Melissa. Do we have questions? Okay, I have one. So from this group, you're more or less the first one really looking into async coding in Python here. What's your thought? Should we introduce more asynchronous code within CephADM, or should we keep it in specific part of the code base? What's your I don't know, what do you think about asynchronous programming in Python?
Yeah, so through this project, it's my first like encounter with async programming that I've done. So like with integrating the async code into the CephADM regular like synchronous code, like I feel like there's this like tendency, like the more you introduce asynchronous code, the more your code it's like slowly becoming more asynchronous, or it's like easy for your code to become more asynchronous just because of like the nature of it. So I do think like if you were to switch more to asynchronous, it would be like a maybe domino effect where a lot of things would have to like change over to be asynchronous. Um, I do feel like with asynchronous programming, like I do enjoy it. Like personally, I find it pretty interesting in terms of like what if it would be good for CephADM or the rest of Ceph. I guess that depends on just like whoever's like developing, like if they think async is the right way to go in terms of like Ceph's like what Ceph needs. Personally, I think it's pretty interesting. I think with the event loop, that's like something I was struggling with, was like figuring out getting like some when I was initially programming, getting some like async related bugs because I didn't know how to handle the event loop. But I think if the event loop and then the other areas are aligned, then I think it'd be interesting to see CephADM and Ceph become more asynchronous.
Okay, thank you.
Just a curiosity question from a performance perspective and in the way we changed it. Are there big implications, or what would what are the overheads of some of these calls? Is it large, and does that matter for what we're trying to accomplish from the point of view of the problem we're trying to solve? So where do you see that?
So in terms of the performance, because async SH is asynchronous, typically you would see a little like if you're just like purely comparing libraries, you would see like a better performance because it's asynchronous. The way I'm like using it here, I do think that like we are creating a new thread, which could have some overhead, but I think that there's benefits in terms of like the user experience because they're like performance wise, I don't think there should be like too big of like a difference between the current like remote to SecNet and with async SSH. Since we are caching that connection object, it's not like we're creating a new connection object each time. So I don't think it would be that negatively affected, but I think that the user experience improvement would greatly like outweigh or like the like any performance costs. Just because using like a dedicated SSH library would just like offer so much more, just like a better experience for the user, especially in terms of like handling those errors that may occur. And yeah, I do know like since we are changing a lot with Ceph with like the agent, so that could improve a lot in performance. So any like slight deficit, like if there's any like performance decreases from the async SSH implementation, I feel like the agent could like greatly like improve the performance overall with async SSH.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So my take on it is the library or the choosing a different library doesn't really matter because the performance is really dominated by the SSH protocol and establishing connections and which library we are using doesn't really matter at all. And we have different goals here.
So architecturally and what you're doing, the functionally, you're doing the same things, but just with a different library. So if that's the case, then yes, I would agree. I didn't quite follow that at the beginning. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so Ceph has some slots for the next outreach round. That's from December to February. If anyone has ideas of new projects, feel free to speak up. And I think you also have a project ideas Etherpad somewhere. Guess it's this one here. So if you have any ideas for the next round of Outreachy or GSOC, please add them to this Etherpad. Okay. Yes. Thank you again, Aaron and Melissa, for those two projects. Do we have any other topics for today?
I have one question, but related to this async SSH. Is this package should we or should Ceph provide a suitable dependency for systems that do not yet have this package yet, like CentOS?
I think right now this is only in Kefu's private copper repository, right?
Yeah,
which is a bit. That's not optimal, I guess. So yeah, we have to take it over.
Sorry, one question. I think that Async IO is part of the standard Python library.
Yeah, but not Async SSH.
Yeah, it's not available on CentOS yet.
Like I think Kifu added his COPR repo to like the Ceph COPR repo, but I think it's not available like outside of that.
That is something that we need to solve. Maybe well, to have an installation method for Ceph that allows us to include libraries could be something interesting. It was something that we started but never finished. Okay, but well, it's maybe it's something to retake.
Yep, definitely. Alfonso, as far as I know, the dashboard team was interested in using, in installing packages directly from pip, right? If I'm not mistaken. And
yeah,
avoid...
it's in our roadmap, but we haven't started yet this proof of concept. But yeah, we have to do it.
Because the overhead of maintaining that RPM package for CentOS is quite big, you know. So that would be a great use case for avoiding having that RPM dependency.
Yeah, I know.
Good idea for the next Outreachy.
Yeah, why not? But it's not really a fun project, you know.
No.
Okay, then I guess we can conclude the Orchestrator Weekly for today, if there is nothing else. Okay, thank you, and let's link up next week. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.